She did not cry when they laughed at her dress. She did not flinch when they whispered her name like it was something dirty. Clara Bennett had buried her father with borrowed money and walked into that dining room alone, chin lifted, hands steady. But when the coldest man in Kentucky turned and looked at her, really looked at her for the first time in her life, she felt something crack open in her chest. Not fear. Something far more dangerous than fear. If this story moves you, subscribe and tell me in the comments. What city are you watching from? I want to see how far this story travels. Kentucky summer, 1816. The Whitmore estate had stood on that hill for 30 years, and in 30 years it had never once felt like a home. It felt like a courthouse. It felt like a place where people came to be judged, weighed, and found either worthy or wanting. On the evening of August the 14th, every important family in 3 counties had come to the harvest dinner. The Hawthorns, the Pendletons, the Caldwells, women in silk, men in tailored coats, servants moving between tables like shadows trained never to look anyone in the eye. And at the far end of the long gravel drive, walking alone, because she had no carriage and no escort, came Clara Bennett. She wore a blue cotton dress, not silk, not satin, cotton, washed so many times it had softened to the color of a winter sky. Her gloves were mended at the left thumb. Her shoes were clean but worn at the heel. She had pinned her dark hair up herself without a maid in front of a cracked mirror by candlelight. She looked, as Mrs. Dorothea Hawthorne would later say with great satisfaction, exactly like what she was. The daughter of a dead man with nothing to his name but debts and a reputation for stubbornness. Clara heard the whispers begin the moment she stepped through the front door. She was used to them. She kept walking. The invitation had come 3 days earlier, delivered by a boy on horseback, who seemed confused about why he was bringing it to a farm this small. Clara had read it twice. Then she had set it on the table and stood very still for a long moment. Her neighbor Mrs. Pruitt had come by that afternoon and found it lying there. "You can't go to that," Mrs. Pruitt had said immediately. "I was invited," Clara said. "You were baited," Mrs. Pruitt said. "Clara, I've lived here 40 years. I know these people. They don't invite girls like you to harvest dinners out of kindness. They do it to what?" Mrs. Pruitt had pressed her lips together. "To remind you where you stand." Clara had folded the invitation neatly and tucked it into her apron pocket. "Then I'll remind them," she said, "where I stand." She had not told anyone she was coming. She had walked the 2 miles to the Whitmore estate in the August heat and arrived precisely on time, which was, she had already noticed, something the wealthy rarely bothered to do. The butler at the door. A tall man named Harris, who had worked for the Whitmores longer than Clara had been alive, looked at her with an expression she recognized. Not hostility, pity, which was worse. "Miss Bennett," he said carefully, "you received an invitation." "I did," she said. "Is there a problem, Mr. Harris?" He opened the door wider. "No, miss. Welcome to Whitmore Hall." She walked in. The foyer smelled of candle wax and roses and money. Long tables stretched through the main hall, already set with china. Clara had never seen outside of a merchant's catalog. Chandeliers, real ones, not lanterns. Chandeliers threw light across the faces of 50 people, who all within 10 seconds turned to look at her. The room did not go quiet. It went amused. Clara felt it, the shift in attention, the murmur passing like a ripple through water, the way eyes moved to her dress and then to each other, communicating something she was not supposed to catch. She caught it. She kept her face very still and walked to the seating card that bore her name. She found it immediately. It had been placed at the head table, right beside Nathaniel Whitmore himself. She had heard of Nathaniel Whitmore, the way everyone in Kentucky had heard of him, in pieces, in warnings, in the kind of hushed voice people use when discussing weather that has already destroyed something. Owns more land than any man in this county. Lost his father at 22 and built the estate twice as large by 30. Cold as December stone. Never laughs. Barely speaks. When he does, people listen, because the last man who didn't lost his contract within a week. She had never seen him before tonight. He was already seated when she arrived at the table. He did not stand. He did not look up. He was reading a document right there at the dinner table, as if 50 people were not milling about the room, and as if the seat beside him, her seat, had not been placed there as a joke. He was not what she expected. She had expected someone who looked cruel. He did not look cruel. He looked tired. Not the tired of a man who had worked hard that day. The tired of someone who had been working hard for years and had stopped expecting it to feel like anything other than obligation. His coat was dark. His jaw was set. There was a scar along the left side of his jaw barely visible, and his hands on the document were large and still. Clara sat down beside him. He did not acknowledge her. She picked up her napkin, placed it in her lap, and looked at the table setting with the calm expression of a woman who had not spent the last hour calculating whether she had enough money to keep the farm through winter. From 2 tables away, she heard Dorothea Hawthorne say something low and laughing to the woman beside her. She did not need to hear the words. She understood the grammar of cruelty fluently. Nathaniel Whitmore read to the bottom of his document, folded it precisely, and placed it in his breast pocket. Then, without looking at her, he spoke. "Miss Bennet." His voice was exactly what she'd been told. Low, certain. The kind of voice that expected to be answered. "Mr. Whitmore," she said. He turned then, just slightly. Just enough to look at her with the kind of assessing gaze that she imagined he turned on livestock he was considering purchasing. "You understand," he said, "why you were seated here." It was not a question. Clara met his eyes. They were gray, sharp. And beneath all that sharpness, a very old and very carefully contained kind of loneliness. "I understand exactly why I was seated here," she said pleasantly. "The same reason a fire is lit in a room full of people who want entertainment. They expect me to burn." He was quiet for a moment. "And do you intend to burn?" She tilted her head slightly. "No, Mr. Whitmore, I intend to have dinner." Something moved in his face. Not quite a smile, not even close to a smile, but something. He looked away. Around them, the room had begun to notice that their arrangement was not so far producing the result they'd anticipated. The first course arrived. Clara had not eaten since morning. She ate the soup with the composed focus of a woman who understood that dignity is not lost by being hungry, only by showing it. To her left, a man named Gerald Pendleton, red-faced, well-fed, with the confidence of a man who had never been told no by anyone but his horse, leaned across the table. "Miss Bennet," he said with a wide smile, "I don't believe I've seen you at one of these affairs before." "That is correct," Clara said. "Quite the honor, then, being seated beside our host." He glanced at Nathaniel, whose attention was apparently fixed on his soup. "I imagine you're quite overwhelmed." "I imagine you've said that to a great many women," Clara said, "and none of them have told you how it sounds." The woman beside Gerald made a small, surprised noise. Gerald's smile thinned. "I beg your pardon. It sounds," Clara said with perfect composure, "as though you believe I am not accustomed to sitting down to a meal. I assure you, Mr. Pendleton, I have been sitting down to meals my entire life. The quality of the china varies, but the act is quite the same." The silence that followed was sharp enough to cut. Nathaniel Whitmore set down his spoon. He did not look at Clara. But she saw, and she was watching, because she watched everything. Because watching everything was how a woman without allies survived. She saw the corner of his mouth move. Just slightly. Just once. By the time the second course arrived, Dorothea Hawthorne had maneuvered herself into the chair across from Clara, under the pretense of speaking to the woman beside it. Dorothea Hawthorne was 53 years old, had married well, and had spent 30 of those years building and maintaining a social architecture as intricate and as ruthless as any military fortification. She looked at Clara the way a cat looks at a bird it has already caught. "My dear," she said warmly, "I do hope you're finding the evening comfortable. It must be quite different from what you're used to." "It is different," Clara agreed. "Usually my evenings are quieter. I imagine the farm keeps you quite busy." "It does, though not as busy as managing everyone else's business." Clara smiled. That must be exhausting. Dorothea's expression did not change because Dorothea had decades of practice at not letting her expression change. Your father, she said in the tone of someone producing a weapon, left quite a considerable amount of debt, I understand. The table had gone attentive now. Not quiet people were still speaking, but attentive in the specific way of people who are listening while pretending not to. Clara set down her fork carefully. He did, she said. He also left me a farm that I have been running by myself for 8 months, a knowledge of crop rotation that most men in this county lack, and the understanding that a person's worth is not tallied in their debts. She paused. My father was a good man who made poor financial decisions. That is not an uncommon combination, Mrs. Hawthorne. I've noticed it in several of the wealthiest families here tonight. The woman to Dorothea's left made a sound that was quickly covered by a cough. Dorothea stared at Clara. Clara looked back at her calm and steady and did not look away. Then from her right came a sound she did not expect. Nathaniel Whitmore said very quietly and very clearly, "That's enough, Dorothea." The table went still. In 30 years, Nathaniel Whitmore had hosted perhaps 40 harvest dinners. In all of that time, no one could remember him intervening in a social exchange at his own table. He hosted, he presided, he said what was necessary and nothing more. He did not defend people. Dorothea recovered first. I was only making conversation, Nathaniel. You were doing something else, he said. And then he returned to his plate, and the matter was apparently closed. Clara sat very still. She did not look at him. She was not entirely sure she was breathing correctly. After dinner, the guests moved to the garden where lanterns had been strung between the oak trees and a quartet played at the far end of the lawn. The air was warm and heavy with late summer jasmine, and servants moved between clusters of people with trays of wine. Clara stood at the edge of the gathering near a low stone wall slightly apart, watching the social landscape with the practiced observation of someone who had learned early that she would almost always be outside of it. She did not mind. She was used to standing at the edge of things. She was reaching for a glass of water. She did not drink wine at events where she needed to remain sharp when she heard his footsteps behind her. She knew they were his. She'd been listening to the way he moved through his own home all evening. Deliberate, unhurried, like a man who owns every room he walks into because he actually owns it. Miss Bennet. She turned. Howe was closer than she'd expected. Or maybe she'd expected him to keep the full social distance that men of his position usually maintained. He did not. He stopped perhaps 3 feet from her, his hands at his sides, and looked at her with that same measuring, exhausted gaze. I want to ask you something, he said, and I would prefer that you answer honestly rather than politely. I almost always answer honestly, she said. The polite part is less reliable. Again that movement at the corner of his mouth. Why did you come tonight? He said. Clara considered him. Because I was invited. You know that is not what I mean. She was quiet for a moment. The music drifted from the far end of the garden, and somewhere across the lawn, Dorothea Hawthorne was watching them. Clara could feel it without looking. I came, she said finally, because I am tired of being a lesson other people use to feel better about themselves. Mrs. Hawthorne's lesson was, see how low one can fall. Mr. Pendleton's lesson was, observe how discomfort can be manufactured in another person. Your guests placed me beside you as an object lesson in how a woman without standing is supposed to behave in the presence of those who have it. She looked at him steadily. I came because I disagree with the premise. Nathaniel was quiet for a long moment. You are not afraid of me, he said. It did not sound like a compliment. It sounded like something he was trying to understand. Should I be? Most people are. Most people, Clara said, have things they're afraid of losing. I have very little left to lose, Mr. Whitmore. It makes honesty considerably easier. He looked at her for a long time. Long enough that it moved past the bounds of polite interaction and into something else. Something more like the way you look at something you did not expect to find where you found it. Your father, he said. Thomas Bennett, 4th Virginia Rifles. Clara went very still. You knew him. I knew of him. He served with my uncle during the war. Stubborn man by all accounts. never retreated. No, she said quietly. He never did. Is that where you learned it? The question landed softly, but it landed in a place she had not expected anything to reach tonight. She looked out at the garden, at the lanterns and the silk and the careful performance of prosperity. I learned it, she said, from watching what happens to people who don't. They end up apologizing for existing. She paused. I decided a long time ago that I would rather be inconvenient than invisible. Nathaniel Whitmore looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, and she would think about it for a very long time afterward, "That is the most honest thing anyone has said to me in at least 4 years." She left before the gathering ended. She said no formal goodbyes. She retrieved her shawl from the entrance hall and walked out into the August night and down the long gravel drive toward the road home. The stars were bright. The air smelled like cut hay and distance. She had walked perhaps a quarter mile when she heard hoofbeats behind her on the road. A single horse moving at a trot. She turned. It was one of the Whitmore stable hands leading a horse with a small saddle. "Mr. Whitmore's compliments, miss," the young man said, looking slightly confused by the errand he'd been sent on. "He says the road is not safe at this hour and asks that you take the mare back to your farm. She can be returned in the morning." Clara looked at the horse. She looked back at the house, though she could not see it through the trees. "Tell Mr. Whitmore," she said carefully, "that I appreciate the gesture." "Yes, miss." She took the reins. She rode home through the August dark, and she did not let herself think. Not yet. Not until she was safely inside with the door closed and the candle lit, about the expression on Nathaniel Whitmore's face when he had said, "The most honest thing anyone has said to me in at least 4 years." But when she did think about it sitting at her small table in her small house with the borrowed candle burning low, she thought, "He is lonelier than I am, and he doesn't know yet what that costs." She returned the mare at dawn. She did not send a stable hand. She rode the horse back herself, arriving at the Whitmore estate before the household was fully awake, before the servants had finished laying breakfast, before anyone who mattered was in a position to witness it. That was intentional. Clara Bennett had learned early that there is a particular kind of power in controlling when you are seen. The same stable boy from the night before came out to meet her. He looked startled to find her there at that hour. Her blue dress exchanged for a plain work dress. Her hair tied back simply. Her face showing nothing of what she had spent half the night thinking about. "I'm returning Mr. Whitmore's horse," she said, handing him the reins. "Please thank him for the kindness." "Yes, miss." The boy hesitated. "Mr. Whitmore is already up if you'd like to." "That won't be necessary," Clara said. She turned and walked back down the drive. She had made it perhaps 50 yards when she heard the front door of the house open. She did not turn around. She heard his footsteps on the gravel. Not hurried, not slow. The same deliberate pace she had catalogued the night before, the walk of a man who does not run after anything because he has never had to. "Miss Bennett." She stopped. She turned. Nathaniel Whitmore stood at the edge of his front drive in his shirt sleeves. No coat, no cravat, just the shirt, and his dark trousers, and his boots, and the morning light doing nothing to soften the angles of his face. He looked like a man who had also not slept particularly well. "You didn't need to return her yourself," he said. "I didn't want to owe anyone a favor," Clara said. "Even a small one." Something shifted in his expression. "You consider a borrowed horse a debt. I consider everything a debt until it is settled," she said. "It is a habit I learned from watching what happens when you don't." He studied her for a moment with that gray gaze that seemed to measure things without moving. "Have you eaten this morning?" he said. The question was so unexpected that she almost answered it honestly. "That is not your concern, Mr. Whitmore." It was a simple question. "It was a question that assumes I came here to be offered something," she said. "I came here to return your horse. I've done that. Good morning." She turned again. "Miss Bennett?" She stopped again. She was beginning to understand that conversations with Nathaniel Whitmore ended when he decided they ended, and the particular irritating part of it was that she could not entirely bring herself to object, because the conversations themselves were the most honest ones she'd had in longer than she cared to count. "Come inside," he said. Have breakfast. You walk 2 miles to return a horse before sunrise. You can eat before you walk 2 miles back. Clara stood very still. Behind her she could hear the sounds of the estate waking up. A rooster somewhere. A door. The distant sound of cattle. She turned back to face him. If I come inside, she said, Dorothea Hawthorne will hear about it by noon, and she will have a story assembled by supper that is considerably more interesting than what actually occurred. Dorothea Hawthorne, Nathaniel said, is not someone whose opinion I have ever found useful. You may not find it useful, Clara said. I will be the one wearing it. He was quiet for a moment. Then come around to the kitchen, he said finally. My housekeeper, Mrs. Aldridge, is a discreet woman. No one will see you. Clara looked at him. You are offering me a back entrance, she said flatly. He opened his mouth. Then he stopped. Then for the first time since she had met him, Nathaniel Whitmore looked genuinely uncertain. That is not what I meant, he said. What did you mean? I meant... He stopped again, pressed his jaw together. I meant to be practical. Practical, she repeated. Yes, Mr. Whitmore, Clara said with a patience she did not entirely feel. I have spent 8 months being quietly, practically invisible. I have entered back doors and side gates and kept myself small and out of the way so that good people would not be associated with the burden of my company. She held his gaze. I will not do it here. Not for convenience. Not for practicality. Not for any reason short of genuine necessity. She paused. Is there a genuine necessity? He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, No. Then I will use the front door or I will go home. Another long pause. The front door, he said, is open. She walked back up the drive. He stood aside to let her pass. She went in through the front door of Whitmore Hall in her plain work dress with her plain tied-back hair, and she sat down at the long breakfast table and ate scrambled eggs and bread and drank coffee that was better than any she had made in 8 months, and neither of them said anything for the first several minutes. It was not an uncomfortable silence. That surprised her more than almost anything else had. Tell me about the farm, he said finally. Clara set down her cup. Why? Because you know how to run one, he said. And I have 3 that are failing. She stared at him. You have 3 failing farms, she said slowly, and the most profitable estate in 3 counties. The estate is profitable, he said. The farms are managed by men I inherited from my father, who have been doing things the same way for 25 years and see no reason to change. He looked at her directly. Last night you told Gerald Pendleton that you understood crop rotation in ways most men in this county do not. Was that true, or was it a point in an argument? Clara felt something tighten in her chest. Not offended. Not exactly. More like the feeling of a door opening that she had not expected to find in that particular wall. It was true, she said. Then I want to ask you something, and I want the honest answer, not the one that protects your pride. My pride, she said, is quite capable of protecting itself. Your farm is struggling, he said. It was not a question. Clara was very still. How do you know that? She said, and her voice was level, but only just. Because I own the grain supply contract for this county, he said without apology. I know which farms settled their accounts in spring and which ones extended. Yours extended. The eggs in front of her suddenly required a great deal of attention. Yes, she said. By how much? That, she said, is not your business. It could be, he said quietly. Clara looked up. I was watching her with an expression she could not entirely decode. Not pity, she was certain it was not pity, because she had seen that expression enough times on enough faces to recognize it immediately. And this was not it. It was something else. Something more careful. Something that seemed to be making a calculation she had not been given access to. What are you suggesting? She said. I am suggesting, he said, a consultation. Your knowledge of rotation methods against my land and my resources. I will pay a fair wage for the work. Not charity. Not pity. A fair wage for expertise I currently lack and you currently have. Clara looked at him for a long time. "You don't know me," she said. "You met me 8 hours ago. I know that in 8 hours you refused to be humiliated, corrected Dorothea Hawthorne in front of 30 witnesses, told me the most accurate summary of this county's social structure I have ever heard, and returned a borrowed horse at dawn because you didn't want to owe a debt." He picked up his coffee. "That tells me considerably more than a formal introduction would have." Clara was quiet. Outside, the August morning was getting warmer. She could hear the estate coming fully awake, voices, hoofbeats, the smell of something baking that was entirely too good for a household that apparently had no heart in it. "There are conditions," she said. "Name them. I work on the schedule. I determine, not yours. I report what I find honestly, even if it is not what you want to hear. I am introduced to your farm managers as a consultant, not as a charity case you have taken on out of some misguided—" "Agreed," he said. She stopped. "You didn't let me finish. You were going to say misguided sympathy, or misguided charity, or misguided sense of obligation," he said. "The answer is agreed to all three. Anything else?" Clara looked at him. She had the distinct and unsettling sensation of dealing with a man who was faster than she had initially calculated. "Yes," she said. "One more thing." "Go ahead." "Whatever arrangement we make is between us," she said. "Not announced, not used socially, not leveraged as a story about the generous Whitmore rescuing the fallen Bennett girl." Her voice was absolutely steady. "I have had enough of being someone else's story. If I work for you, I work for you, not for your reputation." Nathaniel set down his cup. He looked at her with that long, measuring look. "Miss Bennett," he said, "the last thing I want is anyone knowing my business." She held his gaze for a moment longer. Then she nodded. "Then we understand each other," she said. And that was how it began. She came back 3 days later. She came in the front door again. She had made that decision permanent in her own mind, and she did not revisit it. And Harris the butler showed her to the study, where Nathaniel was waiting with maps of the 3 farms spread across a table that was large enough to seat 8 people. "Southfield on the Caldwell property," she said, before she had even properly sat down, pointing to the map without ceremony. "You're alternating corn and tobacco on a 2-year cycle. The soil is depleted. You need a fallow year or a nitrogen crop, clover beans, winter rye. Your yields have dropped because you are asking the land to give you the same thing in the same way indefinitely, and land does not work like that." Nathaniel looked at her. "My farm manager has been running that field for 15 years, he said. "Your farm manager," Clara said, "is wrong." Silence. "He will not agree with you," Nathaniel said carefully. "I don't need him to agree with me," Clara said. "I need him to follow the method. If the yield improves by next harvest, which it will, then the argument becomes irrelevant. And if it doesn't, it will," she said simply. "I have been running my father's farm on a 3-year rotation with cover crops since I was 19 years old. The yield comparison would not flatter your manager." Nathaniel was quiet for a moment. Then he turned back to the map. "Show me the second field," he said. She showed him. They spent 4 hours at that table, and in 4 hours, something happened that Clara had not quite expected. She stopped being careful. She was always careful with people. She had learned from her father's death, from the debt collectors, from the slow social exile that followed, that people were something you managed, something you moved around, like furniture in a room, making sure nothing got knocked over. She did not confide in people. She did not get absorbed by conversations. She stayed at the margin of everything, watching, calculating, keeping the exit in sight. But Nathaniel Whitmore asked questions that required real answers, and he listened to those answers in the particular attentive way of a man who has taught himself to extract information from conversations because people have not always given it to him willingly. And somewhere in the middle of a discussion about soil drainage and the water table, Clara forgot to be careful. "My father tried to drain the low field 3 years before he died," she said, pointing to a note she had made on the margin of one of his maps. "He did it the wrong way. He put the drainage channels too deep and pulled moisture away from the root zone instead of just the surface. The field was worse for 3 years before I figured out what he'd done." "How did you figure it out?" Nathaniel said. "I read everything I could find, And then I dug up 6 feet of his original channels and looked at where the water was actually going. She paused. He would have hated that. He was a proud man, but he was also dead, so he didn't get a vote. The words came out before she'd measured them. She felt the silence that followed and waited for it to become awkward. It didn't. My father, Nathaniel said, looking back at the map, installed a grain storage system that made sense in 1800 and has cost me money every year since. I replaced it 2 years after his death. My uncle told me it was disrespectful. He made a mark on the map. My uncle does not run the estate. I do. Clara looked at him. There it was again, that careful, calculated thing beneath the surface of him. Not coldness. Something more like a person who had learned to make the necessary decisions in the absence of people who understood why they were necessary. You are not what people say you are, she said. He looked up. No, he agreed. Neither are you. She was at the estate 4 days that first week. She met the farm managers. All 3 of them were men in their 40s and 50s who had been doing their jobs long enough to have opinions calcified into certainty. And all 3 of them looked at Clara Bennett with varying degrees of skepticism, condescension, and barely concealed offense. The worst was a man named Rufus Cade. Rufus Cade was 51 years old and had managed the primary Whitmore farm since Nathaniel's father had hired him, and he was the kind of man who had confused being useful for a long time with being right about everything. He did not look at Clara when she spoke to him. He looked at a point somewhere past her left shoulder, as if she were a weather phenomenon that would pass if he simply waited long enough. The Southfield rotation, Clara said, standing in the field itself in the August heat that was pressing down on the corn rows like a hand. You need to take it fallow next season. We've never taken that field fallow, Rufus said to the point past her shoulder. I know, Clara said. That's why the yield is down 18% over 5 years. He looked at her then. Not with respect, not yet, but with the sharpened attention of a man whose certainty has been poked with something specific. Where did you get that number? He said. From your own records, she said. Mr. Whitmore gave me access to the last 8 harvest tallies. The decline is consistent, and it corresponds with the planting cycle. She held his gaze. I'm not guessing, Mr. Cade. I'm reading what the land is telling you. The land, he said, with the carefully modulated derision of a man who cannot quite bring himself to be openly rude to a woman being sponsored by his employer, has been telling me things for 30 years. Then it's strange, Clara said quietly, that you haven't been listening. She walked back toward the farmhouse. Behind her, she heard Rufus Cade say nothing, which was, she had found, often louder than anything he could have said. Nathaniel had watched that exchange from the fence line. When she came back to where he stood, she could tell from the particular set of his jaw that he had heard all of it. He'll fight it, Nathaniel said. He will, Clara agreed. Until next harvest. And if you're wrong, I am not wrong. She looked at him steadily. But if I were, I would tell you plainly, and we would correct it. I do not have the luxury of protecting my errors, Mr. Whitmore. I have never been in a position where I could afford to. He looked at her for a moment. Why? He said. Why did you learn all of this? Most women in your situation, most women in my situation, were taught that someone would come along to manage it for them, Clara said. My father taught me differently. He said, Clara, the land doesn't care who owns it. It cares who understands it. And then he died and left me the land, and not much else, so I was obliged to understand it. Nathaniel was quiet. He sounds, he said slowly, like a man who expected a great deal of you. I expected everything of me, she said. I used to resent it. She looked out at the field. Now I am grateful. Another silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, not charged exactly, but weighted in the particular way of silences between 2 people who are saying more than their words contain. There is something I want to ask you, Nathaniel said. Then ask it. At dinner, when Dorothea spoke to you about your father's debts. He stopped. Yes. You did not flinch. It was not a question. No, she said. Most people would have. I know they would, Clara said. But flinching is useful only if the person causing the pain cares whether they hurt you. Dorothea Hawthorne does not care whether she hurt me. She wanted to reduce me in front of an audience. Flinching would have given her what she came for. She paused. So I didn't. Nathaniel studied her. Where did you learn that? He said. The same place I learned everything else, Clara said. From not having any choice but to. He turned back to the field. His jaw was tight. His hands were in his pockets, which she had come to notice he did when something was working on him internally that he did not intend to show. My father, he said, was a man who believed that every problem could be solved with money. When he died and left me this estate, I discovered that some problems had been made considerably worse by that approach. He paused. There were workers who had been managed by payments made to keep them quiet, rather than conditions that made their situation just. He stopped. It took me 4 years to understand what I had actually inherited. Clara looked at him. Why are you telling me that? She said. Because you asked me last night why I was lonely, he said. She blinked. I did not ask you that. You said he is lonelier than I am, he said. Outside the garden, just before you left. Clara went very still. I said that to myself, she said. You were inside. I had come to the door to watch you go, he said. And he said it with the complete absence of self-consciousness that belonged either to a very unself-aware person or a very honest one, and she was beginning to understand that Nathaniel Whitmore was the second kind. I heard you. The August heat pressed down around them. Somewhere in the corn rows a bird was calling. Rufus Cade was visible in the distance looking at the field with his arms crossed performing thoughtfulness. Clara did not say anything for a long moment. Then she said, I'm sorry. That was not meant for you. No, he said, but it was accurate. She looked at him, then really looked at him, the way she had not entirely permitted herself to do at the dinner table with 50 witnesses, or in the study over the maps with the professional distance she had been carefully maintaining. She looked at him, and she saw what she had seen that first night, the tiredness, the containment, the long-practiced stillness of a man who had decided at some point that she could not yet locate that he was safer alone. What happened to you? She said, not cruelly, quietly. His jaw moved. That, he said after a moment, is not a question I have answered for anyone. You don't have to answer it for me, she said. I'm not asking you to. I'm just telling you that I see it, whatever it is. She held his gaze. You don't have to pretend it isn't there, not with me. He looked at her. Something moved in his face. She caught it, and then it was gone, covered over with the same careful, practiced stillness. But she had seen it, and she knew he knew she had. We should go over the third field, he said. Yes, she said. We should. They walked back toward the farmhouse side by side, not speaking. The distance between them was correct and appropriate and entirely social, and it felt in a way Clara could not quite explain and would not have admitted to anyone, like the loneliest 2 feet she had stood in for a very long time. 3 weeks into their arrangement, the town began to notice, not the arrangement itself, that remained quiet as they had agreed, but the fact of Clara Bennett being seen at the Whitmore estate. A delivery boy saw her coming out of the front door one Thursday morning. 2 women from the Caldwell family spotted her riding one of Whitmore's horses along the South Road on a Tuesday afternoon. A farmhand mentioned to another farmhand who mentioned to his wife, who mentioned to her sister, who attended the same church as Dorothea Hawthorne. And Dorothea Hawthorne was not a woman who left information unused. Clara was at the market in town on a Friday morning flour salt, a small quantity of seed she could not yet afford in the quantity she needed when she found Dorothea standing between her and the seed merchant, with the particular settled quality of a woman who has planned an encounter and is pleased with the location she chose for it. My dear, Dorothea said. Mrs. Hawthorne, Clara said. I've been meaning to speak with you. Dorothea's voice was warm in the way that certain types of winter are warm, not actually warm, but simply less cold than what came before. I understand you've been spending time at Whitmore Hall. Around them, the market had gone in that specific way of social public spaces, where people are pretending very hard not to listen. I have some professional business there, Clara said. Professional. Dorothea repeated with the particular weight of a woman who is not repeating a word because she didn't hear it, but because she wants the audience to consider what she considers to be its irony. How interesting. What sort of professional business, if I may ask? Agricultural consultation, Clara said. Dorothea's smile widened slightly. It did not reach anything above her mouth. How resourceful of you, she said, to find such an arrangement, with a man who has never shown any interest in consulting with young women about anything. She paused, and then delivered the line she had clearly prepared. I do hope the friendship is professionally grounded. For your sake. A girl in your position can't afford misunderstandings. The market was very quiet. Clara held Dorothea Hawthorne's gaze. She thought about what Nathaniel had told her 3 weeks ago at the fence line. About his father and the estate, and what he had actually inherited. She thought about the way he had stood in the field in the August heat, and spoken to her with a directness she had encountered in almost no one else, and she thought about the sound of his footsteps on the gravel that first morning, and how he had corrected himself. That is not what I meant when he understood that he had offered her a back entrance. She thought about all of that for approximately 1 second. Then she said, Mrs. Hawthorne, I've noticed something about the way you speak to me. You always begin with my dear, and you always include a warning of some kind, and the warning always contains the phrase, a girl in your position. I want you to understand something. She kept her voice pleasant and level, and completely unambiguous. I know my position. I have known my position every day for 8 months. I do not need you to remind me of it, and I particularly do not need you to remind me of it in the middle of the market with an audience you have selected in advance. She held the woman's gaze. I have work to do. Good morning. She stepped around Dorothea and went to the seed merchant and bought what she could afford. Her hands did not shake until she was back on the road home. She let them shake then, where no one could see. Because here was the thing about not flinching. The thing she had told Nathaniel, but had not entirely told him. The rest of not flinching does not mean not feeling. It means deciding that what you feel is yours and not theirs. It means keeping the hurt on the inside where it belongs to you, rather than giving it to the person who caused it like a gift they didn't earn. She had learned it from her father. She had practiced it for 8 months. She was getting better at it. But better, she had also learned, was not the same as easy. She did not tell Nathaniel about the market, but he found out anyway because that was the nature of that county. And that summer information moved through the social tissue of the place, like water through limestone, finding every crack, and Nathaniel Whitmore, for all that he presented himself as removed from the social operations of the community, had eyes and ears that functioned perfectly well. He came to her farm. That had not happened before. She was in the lower field on her knees in the dirt, checking the root depth on the beans she had planted in the spring, when she heard a horse on the road and looked up, and there he was. No announcement, no stable hand, just Nathaniel Whitmore on his black horse, stopping at her fence line and looking at her with the particular expression she was coming to recognize as the one he wore when he had decided to say something he had been arguing with himself about. He dismounted and tied the horse and came through the gate and stood at the edge of the field. You should have told me, he said. She sat back on her heels and looked up at him. About what? Don't do that, he said. The market. Dorothea. Clara stood. She dusted the dirt from her hands on her apron. It was handled. I know it was handled, he said. I know because everyone who was there has now described it to someone who described it to someone who described it to me, and by every account you managed it exactly as I would have expected you to. His jaw tightened. That is not the point. Then what is the point? She said. The point, he said, is that what happened to you in that market happened because of your association with me, and you have said nothing about it, and that is not something I will... He stopped. Will what? She said quietly. He stood there in her lower field, in his good coat and his good boots, and the expression of a man who is struggling genuinely. Struggling with the gap between what he wants to say and what he has allowed himself to say for a very long time. I will not, he said carefully, be someone else who allows you to bear the cost of being honest. The birds were very loud suddenly. The beans were very green. The sky was very wide and clear and blue, in the way that August sky in Kentucky is wide and clear and blue, enormous and indifferent and beautiful. Clara looked at him for a long moment. "Nathaniel," she said, and she used his name for the first time without asking permission, and his expression shifted in a way that told her he had noticed. "You cannot protect me from Dorothea Hawthorne." "No," he said, "but I can make it clear to this entire county that anyone who wishes to pursue that particular social project will have a considerably harder time of it." "And how," she said, "do you intend to do that?" He looked at her. "By not hiding," he said. "By not using back entrances and managing appearances. By being—" He stopped again. This one was longer. "By being honest," he said finally, "about what I value." Clara stood very still. The question she wanted to ask was enormous, and the moment felt delicate in the specific way of things that have not yet broken, that are balanced on the edge of something. And she was a woman who understood the value of what is not yet spoken aloud. So she asked the smaller question instead. "Did you eat today?" she said. He blinked. Clearly this was not what he had expected her to say. Yes, he said. "Good," she said. "Because I have cornbread, and I am about to have a very late lunch, and you are welcome to it, if you want to stop standing in my bean field, looking like a man who is about to make a speech." Nathaniel Whitmore stood in her bean field. He looked at her. Then slowly, with the rusty quality of something that has not been used in a long time, the corner of his mouth pulled into something that was unmistakably the beginning of a real smile. "I was not going to make a speech," he said. "You absolutely were," she said, and turned and walked toward the farmhouse. After a moment, she heard his boots in the dirt behind her. He ate the cornbread. He ate it standing at her kitchen table, because she had not invited him to sit, and he had not presumed, and she found that detail, the fact that the most powerful man in 3 counties was standing in her small kitchen, waiting to be asked, more telling than almost anything else she had learned about him. "Sit down," she said. He sat. She put coffee on the fire and cut 2 pieces of cornbread and set them on the table and sat across from him, and for a few minutes neither of them said anything, and the kitchen was full of the sounds of a working farm in August, the wind, the cattle, the distant complaint of a gate that needed fixing. "You grew up here," he said. "In this house," she said. "My father built it. He wasn't a carpenter, and it shows in places, but it stands." Nathaniel looked around the kitchen with the attention of a man assessing a thing he has not seen before. Not critically, carefully. "It's a good house," he said. "It is," she said. "It's also not paid for, but we don't need to discuss that today." He looked at her. "Clara," he said, and it was the first time he had used her given name, and she felt it land somewhere behind her sternum with a precision she had not invited. "How much?" "No," she said. "I haven't asked a question yet." "You were about to ask how much the debt is," she said. "And the answer is no. Not because I don't appreciate whatever it is you're trying to do, but because if you pay my father's debt, I become something I cannot afford to become." "What is that?" "Dependent," she said. "On you, on your goodwill, on what you decide to do with that goodwill in 6 months or a year." She held his gaze. "I have watched what happens to women who become dependent on the goodwill of powerful men, Nathaniel. It does not end with the debt paid. It ends with the debt transferred." He was quiet for a long time. "You think I would do that?" he said. Not angry, measuring. "I think you wouldn't intend to," she said. "I think intentions and outcomes are not always the same thing." He picked up his coffee cup, set it down without drinking. "When I was 24, he said, and his voice had shifted into something lower and less careful. The voice of someone who has made a decision without entirely being ready for it. "I was engaged to a woman named Margaret Harlow. She was from a good family. Her father approved. My father approved. The county approved." He stopped. Clara did not say anything. "We were to be married in the spring," he said. "In December, I discovered that her family was considerably less solvent than they had presented themselves. The engagement had been orchestrated specifically to access the Whitmore accounts." He paused. She did not know the full extent of what her father had planned, or so she said. I was never entirely certain which version to believe. The kitchen was very quiet. "What happened?" Clara said. The engagement ended, he said. Her family left the county, and I decided that I had been extremely foolish. He looked down at the table, and that I would not be foolish again. Clara sat with that for a moment. Is that why you are the way you are? She said. What way is that? Careful, she said. Behind glass. As if you are in a room but watching from outside it. His jaw moved. Probably, he said. She hurt you, Clara said. Her father used me, he said. There is a difference. Is there? Clara said quietly. Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like the person who got hurt was 24 years old and trusted someone and was wrong and spent the next 10 years making sure he would never be wrong in that particular way again. He looked at her. And what, he said, is the problem with that? The problem, Clara said, is that you're not just protecting yourself from people who would use you. You're protecting yourself from everyone. And a door that is locked against all people doesn't get to choose which ones it keeps out. The quiet that followed was not the comfortable silence of 3 weeks of working mornings. It was the particular quiet of something said that cannot be unsaid, sitting in the room between two people who are both deciding what to do with it. That, Nathaniel said after a long moment, is either the most perceptive or the most presumptuous thing anyone has ever said to me. Which is it? Clara said. He looked at her. Both, he said. She almost smiled. September came without announcement. The way September does in Kentucky, not with a dramatic shift, but with a slow change in the quality of light, a certain deepness in the blue of the sky, the mornings getting their edge back. Clara came to the Whitmore estate 4 days a week now, and on the days she was there she worked. She argued with Rufus Cade about the South Field until he stopped arguing and started listening, which happened on a Tuesday in early September, when she walked him to the yield records and showed him the numbers side by side, without comment, and let him reach the conclusion himself. She met with Nathaniel in the study in the late afternoons after the field work was done, and they went over accounts and progress and the slow incremental battle of changing systems that had been in place for decades. The work was real. The arrangement was professional and precise. And something else was happening quietly underneath all of that, like water moving under ice. She noticed it in small things. The way he waited now at the front door when she arrived, not always visible, but somehow always there within minutes. The way he had begun to leave her coffee on the study table before she came in, made the way she took it, which he had apparently paid attention to, without mentioning it. The way he had 3 weeks in, quietly discharged a portion of her debt at the grain merchant, not her father's larger debt, which she had forbidden, but the spring extension on the seed account, the small one she had not told him about, that she discovered only when she went to settle it herself, and was told it had already been addressed by the Whitmore account. She had gone directly back to the estate. She had walked into the study without knocking, which she had never done before. "You paid my seed account," she said. He looked up from his papers. "It was a business expense. You are consulting on my farms. The tools of your trade are reasonable." "It was my seed account," she said, "for my farm, which is not one of yours." "Not yet," he said. She stopped. "What does that mean?" she said. He set down his pen. He looked at her with the expression she had catalogued under something he's been thinking about that he has not told her yet. "I want to offer you a land arrangement," he said. "A legal partnership on the lower acreage adjacent to your current property. It would expand your working land by 40 acres. I provide the capital improvements. You provide the management and the expertise. We split the yield." Clara stared at him. "You want to go into business with me," she said. "I already have," he said. "This would formalize it." "Nathaniel," she said. And his name still did something when she said it. She was still not accustomed to it. She was not sure she wanted to be accustomed to it. "That is not a business arrangement. That is 40 acres of Whitmore land put in the hands of a woman with no legal standing to hold it, which means—" "It would be held in your name," he said. "I have spoken to my lawyer." She went completely still. "You spoke to your lawyer," she said slowly, "about putting land in my name." "Yes. Without telling me." "I was preparing an offer," he said. "I am offering it now. And if I say no—" "Then you say no," he said. and we continue as we are." She looked at him for a long time. He held the gaze without shifting, without the small defensive movements of a man who knows he has overstepped. He simply waited in the still, direct way that was entirely his own. "Why?" she said finally. "Because you are the best person I have found in 10 years to manage land that I cannot manage properly without you," he said. "And because I want to see what you do with 40 acres that belong to you." Something moved in her chest that she did not entirely have a name for. "It would cause talk," she said. "It will cause talk regardless," he said. "You and I both know that." She was quiet. "Give me 3 days," she said. "Take the time you need," he said. She took 2 days. She came back on a Wednesday morning and walked into the study and said, "I have conditions." And he looked up and said, "Name them." And she did, and he agreed to every single one without negotiating, which was either a sign of respect or a sign of something else, and she was not yet ready to examine the second possibility too closely. They signed the papers the following Monday. The talk started by Wednesday. Not the quiet glancing kind that had begun in August. The full-volume positioned strategic kind, organized and deployed by Dorothea Hawthorne, with the focused efficiency of a woman who has been waiting for exactly this. The story as it circulated through the county was this: Clara Bennett, the dead officer's penniless daughter, had maneuvered herself into a legal arrangement with Nathaniel Whitmore by means that were not entirely professional. The specifics varied, depending on who was telling it and to whom. But the consistent elements were: she had pursued him. She had taken advantage of his isolation, and the land arrangement was not a business partnership, but an acquisition of a different kind. Clara heard it from Mrs. Pruitt, who came to the farm on a Thursday morning, wearing the expression of someone delivering bad news they have been rehearsing. "I want you to know," Mrs. Pruitt said, "that I don't believe a word of it." "Tell me what it says," Clara said. Mrs. Pruitt told her. Clara stood in her kitchen and listened to the story about herself, the version of herself that existed in Dorothea Hawthorne's construction. The calculated, scheming, desperate version, who had used the harvest dinner as an opportunity, and the consulting arrangement as a cover, and she felt something she had not felt in a long time. Not humiliation, not fear, rage, clean and cold, and very, very quiet. "Thank you for telling me," she said to Mrs. Pruitt. "Clara, what are you going to—" "I'm going to finish mucking out the lower barn," Clara said. "And then I'm going to eat lunch, and then I'm going to do exactly what I was going to do today before you arrived." Mrs. Pruitt looked at her helplessly. "You can't just ignore it." "I'm not ignoring it," Clara said. "I'm deciding where to fight and where not to." She went and mucked out the lower barn. She did not go to Nathaniel. She had made herself a promise on the night she had first ridden his borrowed horse home through the August dark that she would not become a woman whose response to difficulty was to turn to a powerful man. That was the shape of the trap, the same trap. Dorothea's story was designed to push her into. Fight the story by running to Nathaniel, and she became the story. She would not become the story. She came to the estate the following Monday as scheduled. She worked the morning in the fields. She came to the study in the afternoon. She sat down across the table from Nathaniel, and she opened the account ledger, and she said, "The South Field numbers from last week. Rufus thinks we'll see a measurable difference by end of month." Nathaniel did not open his own ledger. He said, "You heard." "Yes," she said. And I'm looking at the South Field numbers," she said. "Clara." She looked up. He was watching her with an expression she had not seen from him before. Not the measuring gaze. Not the careful containment. Something more unguarded than that something that had gotten past the wall and was standing in the open. "I want to respond to it," he said. "How?" she said. "Publicly," he said. "I want to make it clear in terms that leave no ambiguity that the arrangement between us is legitimate, that your expertise is genuine, and that anyone who suggests otherwise is misinformed at best and deliberately dishonest at worst." Clara looked at him. "That will make it worse," she said. "It will silence it," he said. "Nathaniel," she said carefully. The county does not want to believe a poor woman has genuine expertise. They want to believe a story they already know. A powerful man and a scheming woman is a story they know. A poor woman who is actually skilled is a story they don't have a framework for yet. She held his gaze. You cannot argue people into a new framework. You can only show them one. He was quiet. So what do you propose? He said. I propose, she said, that we go to the Caldwell Fall Gathering next month. He stared at her. Together, she said. Not hidden, not explained, just present. Let them see us as we actually are. Let them watch you defer to my assessment of the yield. Let them see the farm manager show me the numbers before he shows them to you. Let them observe the reality rather than the story. Nathaniel was very still. That is a more patient strategy than I would have chosen, he said. I know, she said. That is why it will work. He looked at her for a long moment. You are, he said, the most tactically intelligent person I have met in 10 years. I'm a woman who can't afford to make mistakes, she said. It forces creativity. 2 weeks before the Caldwell gathering, the situation changed. It changed on a Tuesday in a way Clara had not anticipated, which was itself notable because she had anticipated most things. She was leaving the estate late afternoon, the light going golden, the fields long and still around her when she came around the side of the house and found standing at the front gate a man she recognized. His name was Edwin Harlow. He was Margaret Harlow's younger brother. He was 28, well-dressed, and he was looking at the Whitmore estate with an expression that mixed hunger and calculation in proportions that Clara recognized immediately, because she had seen that exact combination in the faces of the debt collectors who had come to her father's farm. He saw her before she could redirect. Miss Bennet, he said with the practiced warmth of a man who deploys charm as a tool. I don't believe we've been formally introduced. Edwin Harlow. I know who you are, Clara said. He smiled. Good, that saves time. He looked past her at the house. Is Whitmore in? I have business to discuss. I don't keep Mr. Whitmore's schedule, she said. No, of course not. The smile stayed in place. Though I understand you keep quite a bit else of his. The farms, the accounts. Quite an arrangement for a Bennet. He tilted his head slightly. Your father knew mine, I think. Before everything. My father knew a great many people before everything, Clara said. Good afternoon, Mr. Harlow. She walked past him. She heard him behind her. Give Whitmore my regards, Miss Bennet. Tell him I'll call again. She went directly inside. She found Nathaniel in the study. She closed the door behind her, which she had never done before, and he looked up immediately because the closed door was information. Edwin Harlow is at your gate, she said. Everything changed in Nathaniel's face in a single second. Not rage. Harder than rage. The specific expression of a man who has been expecting a thing for a long time and is furious at himself for being surprised by it anyway. Why? He said. His voice was absolutely level. The levelness itself was alarming. He says he has business, Clara said. He was looking at the estate the way people look at things they intend to take. Nathaniel stood up from the desk. Stay here, he said. Nathaniel. Please, he said. And then he was gone. Clara stood in the study. She did not stay. She followed him at a distance to the front of the house, and she stood back from the doorway and watched through the window as Nathaniel walked to the gate where Edwin Harlow was waiting. She could not hear the words. She could read the conversation in the bodies. Edwin Harlow spoke with the loose confidence of a man who believes he holds something valuable. He made gestures, the open hands of a man presenting an offer. He smiled at intervals. He indicated the house, the land, the broader estate with a sweeping gesture that said all of this. Nathaniel stood completely still through all of it. And then Nathaniel said something. Short. Whatever it was short. Edwin Harlow's smile dropped. He spoke again. Longer this time. Spoke again. Longer this time. More pointed. The hands had stopped being open and were gesturing differently now. Nathaniel said something else. Even shorter. Edwin Harlow looked at him for a long moment. Then he turned and walked to his horse and rode away without looking back. Nathaniel stood at the gate until he was gone. Then he turned and came back inside, and his face was the most carefully controlled thing Clara had ever seen it be, which meant that underneath it was the opposite. "What did he want?" she said. Nathaniel stopped when he saw her in the hall. He had told her to stay in the study. They both knew she had not. He did not address that. "He came to propose a business arrangement," he said. "The Harlow family has accumulated new debts in Virginia. He wanted to renegotiate an old—" He stopped. His jaw was a hard line. "It does not matter what he wanted. He will not come back." "What did you say to him?" Clara said. "The first time I told him no." "And the second time?" Nathaniel looked at her directly. "The second time I told him that if he came to this property again, he would find that the Whitmore name carries considerably more weight in this county than he appears to have accounted for." Clara was quiet for a moment. "He'll go to Dorothea," she said. "He's the kind of man who collects allies the way others collect debts. He'll find her, and he'll give her something to work with." "I know," Nathaniel said. "Then the Caldwell gathering becomes more important," Clara said. "Yes." They stood in the hallway of Whitmore Hall, and the late afternoon light came through the tall windows and lay across the floor between them, and Nathaniel was still wearing the expression he wore when he was fighting himself, and Clara was still wearing the expression she wore when she was calculating. And somewhere in the space between those two expressions, something shifted. "He said something to you," Nathaniel said. "At the gate, before I came out. He introduced himself," she said. "He mentioned that his father knew mine." "What else?" She held his gaze. "He suggested that our arrangement was noteworthy, for a Bennett." She watched Nathaniel's jaw tighten. "Clara," he started. "Don't," she said quietly. "Don't apologize for him. He is not your responsibility." "He is connected to my history," Nathaniel said. "That makes him—" "Connected to your history," she said. "Not your responsibility. You did not send him here. You did not create him. And you cannot protect me from every person who decides that my name or my circumstances are fair game." She looked at him steadily. "What you can do, what you are doing, is treat me like I am worth treating well. That is not a small thing, Nathaniel. That is in fact almost everything." He was very still. "You are," he said. And then he stopped, and something happened in his face that she had not seen before, a kind of careful dismantling of the careful, a layer of the glass coming down. "You are the most— I don't have a sufficient word for what you are." "You have an extensive vocabulary," she said. "I've noticed." "Not for this," he said. The hallway was very quiet. Clara felt the moment, the way you feel. Weather changing, a pressure shift, a held breath in the air. The particular stillness before something decides to move. "I should go," she said. "Yes," he said. He did not move. "Nathaniel." "Yes, at the Caldwell gathering," she said, "when we walk in together, and I mean together through the front door, not timed separately. There will be a moment where the room will decide what to do with what it sees." She held his gaze. "I need to know that you will not flinch." "I won't flinch," he said, "because if you do, Clara—" His voice was quiet and completely certain. "I will not flinch." She looked at him for a long moment. "Then I'll see you at the Caldwell gathering," she said. She walked down the hall and out the front door and down the drive. The evening was coming in soft and the late September light, doing what September light does in Kentucky, lying over everything, like something that knows it is about to leave. She walked. She did not let herself think about the thing he had not finished saying. She was a practical woman. She had always been a practical woman. She managed soil and water and seed and debt and pride and grief and the particular daily labor of being a person who did not have the luxury of romanticizing her circumstances. But when she reached the road and turned toward home, and the light went gold around her, she thought just once, just quietly, just for the length of a single breath, about the way he had looked when he said, "I don't have a sufficient word for what you are." And then she thought about the Caldwell gathering, and Edwin Harlow, and Dorothea Hawthorne, and everything that was coming. And she walked faster. Because ready was not a feeling. Ready was a decision. And she had made it. The Caldwell gathering was on a Saturday. Clara dressed without ceremony. The same blue cotton dress she had worn to the harvest dinner, washed and pressed, because she had made a decision about that dress the moment Dorothea Hawthorne had looked at it with satisfaction, and she intended to honor that decision. She pinned her hair herself in front of the same cracked mirror by the same candlelight, and she looked at her own reflection for a long moment before she left. She looked like what she was. She had decided that was enough. Nathaniel arrived at her farm at 6:30, which she had not expected. She had expected to meet him at the Caldwell estate. Instead, she heard hoofbeats on the road and came to the door and found him there on his black horse, dressed for the occasion, with a second horse saddled and waiting behind him. He looked at her. She looked at him. "You came here first," she said. "We said together," he said. "Together means from the same direction." Something in her chest pulled tight, and she did not examine it. She simply took the reins of the second horse and mounted, and they rode to the Caldwell estate side by side through the October evening. The air sharp and clean and smelling of turned earth, and neither of them needed to say anything, because the decision had already been made, and they were simply living inside it now. They arrived together. They went through the front door together. And the room, the assembled wealth and social architecture of 3 Kentucky counties, gathered in the Caldwell main hall, with its long tables and its candles and its music and its 50 years of accumulated certainty about how things were ordered, that room went quiet in a way that Clara felt in her teeth. She had prepared for this. She had not prepared for how much it would feel like walking into weather. Nathaniel's hand was not at her back. He did not touch her. But he was beside her close enough that she could feel the deliberateness of his presence, the fact that he had positioned himself in a way that said with her without requiring words, and she understood that for a man who had spent 10 years inside glass, this was not a small thing. She lifted her chin. She walked into the room. Dorothea Hawthorne found them within 4 minutes. Clara had expected 5, so Dorothea was running ahead of schedule, which meant she had been watching the door. She came with 2 women beside her. Mrs. Caldwell herself, the hostess whose expression was the careful blank of someone trying to decide which side of a thing they want to be on, and a woman. Clara did not recognize Younger with the particular composed beauty of someone who has been told since childhood that her appearance is her primary asset. Clara registered all 3 in the time it took them to cross the room. "Nathaniel," Dorothea said, with the warm familiarity of a woman who has known someone long enough to believe she has a claim on them. "What a wonderful surprise. We did not know you were bringing a guest." "Miss Bennet is not my guest," Nathaniel said. His voice was pleasant and completely unambiguous. "She is my business partner. She received her own invitation." The small recalibration that moved through Dorothea's face was worth the entire walk from the farm. "Of course," Dorothea said smoothly. "Miss Bennet, how lovely." She gestured to the unknown woman. "Have you met Eliza Harlow? She's visiting from Virginia, Edwin's sister." Clara went very still on the inside. On the outside, she extended her hand with perfect composure. "Miss Harlow, a pleasure." Eliza Harlow shook her hand with the mechanical politeness of a woman performing an obligation. She was looking at Nathaniel, not at Clara. At Nathaniel, with an expression that Clara identified in the space of a single second as something rehearsed, something prepared. The expression of a woman who has been told what to feel and has not yet decided how much of it is real. "Nathaniel," Eliza said softly. "It has been a long time." The name in her mouth was different from the name in Clara's mouth. Older, more entitled to itself. Nathaniel looked at Eliza Harlow. His face was absolutely neutral. "Miss Harlow," he said. "Not Eliza. Miss Harlow." Clara heard the entire distance between those 2 words. So did Dorothea. And so from the slight tightening around her eyes did Eliza herself. "Edwin mentioned he had called on you recently," Eliza said. "I hope the visit was not an imposition." "It was brief," Nathaniel said. "He has been very eager to reconnect," she said. "As have I." A pause precise and placed. "I have often thought about what was left unfinished between us." The room had the quality of a room that is listening. Clara looked at her drink. She would not look at Nathaniel. She would not give Dorothea the satisfaction of seeing her look at Nathaniel. "What was between us," Nathaniel said in a voice, so even it could have been used as a carpenter's level, "was finished 10 years ago. I wish you well, Miss Harlow. Excuse me." He turned back to Clara. His eyes met hers. She saw for just a moment the thing underneath the neutral, a kind of weariness, and beneath the weariness, something that was working very hard to stay contained. "I believe we were going to speak with Henderson about the grain contracts," he said. "We were," she said. They walked away from Dorothea Hawthorne and Eliza Harlow together, and Clara did not look back, and Nathaniel did not look back, and the conversation behind them began again, like water closing over a stone. They found Henderson near the far wall. He was a square, practical man who dealt in grain futures and had the handshake of someone who had been doing physical work his whole life, regardless of how much money he now had. He looked at Clara when Nathaniel introduced her as his agricultural consultant, and his assessment was quick and professional and completely free of the social calculation that characterized every other pair of eyes in the room. "Bennett," he said. "Thomas Bennett's girl." "Yes," Clara said. "Your father sold me the best rye I ever bought," he said. 3 years running before the trouble. Best rotation I'd seen in this county." He looked at her with a nod that meant something specific coming from a man like Henderson. "You running the farm now?" "I am," she said. "And consulting on the Whitmore properties." Henderson said. He looked at Nathaniel. "Smart," he said, as if this were a complete sentence. Then he turned back to Clara. "Southfield giving you trouble." And just like that, they were talking about the thing that actually mattered in the middle of the Caldwell gathering, with the candles and the silk and the whispers going on around them, and Clara felt the particular settling satisfaction of a woman who is being seen for what she knows rather than what she owns. She was in the middle of explaining the fallow rotation when she heard it. Not words. Tone. The specific quality of raised social voices, not loud, never loud in rooms like this, but pointed, arranged for maximum carry. She heard her own name. She did not stop talking to Henderson, but she tracked it the way you track weather when you cannot look away from what you are doing. Dorothea across the room, Eliza Harlow beside her, Mrs. Caldwell looking uncertain, and 3 other women whose names Clara knew by category rather than feeling, the ones who had been at the harvest dinner, the ones who had watched Dorothea seat Clara beside Nathaniel as a cruel joke and had waited with pleasure for the entertainment. They were not laughing now. They were doing something more precise than laughing. They were constructing. Clara finished her point to Henderson. She excused herself for a moment. She crossed the room, not toward Dorothea, but toward Mrs. Caldwell specifically, because Mrs. Caldwell was the hostess, and therefore the axis on which the evening's social gravity turned, and Clara had been watching people long enough to know that the person in the center of a cruelty is rarely its architect. "Mrs. Caldwell," she said pleasantly. "Thank you for the invitation. Your home is beautiful." Mrs. Caldwell looked faintly relieved to have a normal thing to respond to. "Miss Bennett, I'm glad you could come." "I understand Miss Harlow is visiting from Virginia," Clara said. Conversational, easy. "How long does she intend to stay?" Mrs. Caldwell glanced at Dorothea. "A few weeks, I believe." "That's kind of you to host her," Clara said. She smiled, easy and genuine, the smile of a woman who is not performing ease, but has decided to inhabit it. "I hope she enjoys Kentucky. It must be quite different from what she's accustomed to." She used Dorothea's own phrasing. Exactly. Precisely. The sentence landed. She saw it land in Dorothea's face, the slight intake, the recognition. Then Clara excused herself and walked back to Henderson and Nathaniel and continued talking about the South Field. Behind her, she heard nothing more about her name. It was 3/4 of an hour into the evening when Edwin Harlow arrived. He had not been there when they came in. Clara noticed his arrival the way she noticed most things, peripherally, without appearing to notice, which was a skill she had refined over 8 months of being the person in every room that other people discussed. He came in with 2 men she did not recognize, and the easy bearing of someone who had decided in advance that the evening would go his way. He found Eliza first. Clara watched them speak across the room, quick and low. Edwin's head bent to his sister's. Eliza's response short and pointed. Edwin straightened. He looked across the room. He looked at Nathaniel. Then he looked at Clara. And something moved in his expression that she had seen before in different faces, in different rooms, and always when she had something someone wanted to take. He began to cross the room. Not toward Nathaniel, toward her. She stood her ground. She would not move. He stopped beside her with the practiced social ease of a man who has never had to earn a room. "Miss Bennet, what a pleasure to find you here." "Mr. Harlow," she said. "I've been hearing a great deal about you," he said. "Your arrangement with Whitmore has the county quite entertained." "I imagine the county entertains easily," she said. He smiled. It did not reach anything. Nathaniel has always been susceptible to a certain kind of attention. It's a quality his father had as well. God rest him. He trusted people who were good at appearing trustworthy. Clara looked at him steadily. "That's an interesting way to open a conversation," she said. "Most people start with the weather." "I'm a direct man," Edwin said. "You are a man," Clara said, "who has come across this room specifically to say something you believe will alarm me. So go ahead and say it, Mr. Harlow, and then we can both get back to our evenings." His smile cooled by a precise degree. "The land arrangement," he said. "The 40 acres. I want you to understand something about how those things are viewed legally in this county, when they involve a woman of uncertain standing and a wealthy man who has historically been, let us say, impulsive with his trust." "Impulsive," she repeated. "The Harlow family has existing legal relationships with the Whitmore estate," he said. "Historic ones, ones that predate any recent consultancy." He let the word sit. A case could be made that the land arrangement interferes with those prior relationships. Clara was quiet for 3 full seconds. Then she said, "Mr. Harlow, your family had a prior relationship with this estate that ended when your sister accepted a proposal under false pretenses, and your father attempted to access the Whitmore accounts through fraudulent means." She kept her voice pleasant and her posture easy. "That is not a historic legal relationship. That is a historic legal liability. And if you are suggesting that you intend to use it as a weapon, I would strongly encourage you to speak with a lawyer before you do, because Nathaniel Whitmore has one, and I suspect his is considerably better than yours." Edwin Harlow stared at her. "You are," he said slowly, "not what I expected." "No one who underestimates me is," she said. "Good evening, Mr. Harlow." She turned away from him. Her heart was going very fast. She breathed through it. She found Nathaniel's eyes across the room he had been watching. She realized he had been tracking her the entire time Edwin was beside her, and she gave him the smallest shake of her head. "Not now. Not here. Don't come over." He held still. He trusted her. That she thought was the thing. That was the thing she had not expected and could not quite account for, and felt in her chest like something taking root. He trusted her. The evening broke apart around 9 o'clock. The way these gatherings did. Guests finding their coats, servants bringing horses, the long social performance relaxing into individual exits. Clara was near the door saying a final word to Henderson when she heard Eliza Harlow's voice, louder than it had been all evening, placed with the specific intent of carrying. "I simply feel," Eliza was saying to Mrs. Caldwell and 2 other women, "that it is such a shame. When a man of his position, of his history, of everything his family built, when he becomes so isolated that he cannot recognize when someone is simply using him." Again. A pause, weighted and precise. "We have seen it before, of course. It is always a woman with nothing who finds a man with everything and constructs a situation that appears professional." The word had the same quality Dorothea's words always had. The kind of word that means 2 things at once and is entirely aware of both. Clara heard it. Henderson heard it. She could tell by the way he stopped talking. Half the room heard it. And then the room did something. It waited. Because Nathaniel was there. And everyone knew Nathaniel was there. And everyone knew what was being said was designed to reach him. Clara stood very still. She felt the moment before it broke. She heard his footsteps. Not from beside her. From across the room where he had been standing with two men from the county moving through the gathering crowd with that deliberate, unhurried pace. He crossed the room. He did not go to Eliza. He went to Clara. He stopped beside her, closer than professional distance, closer than they had been in all the months of working alongside each other, and he turned to face the room, and he said in a voice that was not loud, but was the kind of voice that does not need to be loud, "Miss Harlow." Eliza turned. The room was quiet now, not pretending to be busy. Quiet. "I want to make something clear," Nathaniel said, "for the benefit of anyone in this room who is still uncertain." He looked at Eliza Harlow directly, without heat, without any of the things a lesser man would have brought to this moment. "Clara Bennett is the most skilled agricultural mind I have encountered in 10 years of managing this estate. She has increased the projected yield on 3 properties in less than 3 months. She holds a legal partnership in my business because she earned it. Not because of manipulation, not because of construction, because she is genuinely the best person for the work." He paused. "The only person in this room who has ever attempted to use me for their own ends is standing in front of me right now. And the difference between that experience and this one is not subtle." The silence was absolute. Eliza Harlow's composure fractured along a single line. Just one. Just for a second. Then she put it back. But everyone saw it. Dorothea Hawthorne. Clara noticed had gone entirely still, with the expression of a woman recalculating something at speed. Nathaniel turned to Clara. Not to the room, to her. "Are you ready to go?" he said. "Yes," she said. They walked out through the front door of the Caldwell estate, through the same door they had come in, and neither of them looked back. The ride back was quiet for a long time. The October night was cold and clear, the stars enormous, the road empty. They rode side by side, and the horses moved at an easy pace, and Clara's heart was still going faster than was entirely comfortable. "You didn't need to do that," she said finally. "I know," he said. "It will change things. People will talk about it differently now. They'll say—" "I know what they'll say," he said. "I've spent 10 years managing what they say. I am tired of it." She looked at him in the dark. "Nathaniel." "I meant every word of it," he said. "Not for the room, not for Eliza, for you. Because you have spent 3 months being the subject of conversations that have nothing to do with who you actually are, and I have watched you manage it with more grace than I have managed anything, and I am done being silent about the value of what you are, while other people fill that silence with their own version of you." Clara was quiet. "That is possibly the most words you have said at one time," she said. He looked at her. "Don't," he said, but the word was not harsh. It was almost gentle. The word of a man who is asking her to stay inside the serious thing with him, rather than deflect. "Don't make a joke of it. Not this time." She stopped. She looked at him. The stars were very bright. "All right," she said quietly. "I won't." They rode for a little while longer. Then he said, "I told you months ago that you were the most honest thing in 4 years." He looked straight ahead down the dark road. "That has not become less true." Clara felt something move in her chest that had been still for a very long time. "Nathaniel," she said. "Yes." "What are you—" She stopped, started again. "What is this for you? What are you, what are we?" "I don't know," he said. And he said it with the extraordinary honesty of a man who has stopped pretending he knows things he doesn't. "I know what I want it to be. I don't know if that is—" He stopped. His jaw tightened. "I am not good at this. I want you to know that I am aware of that." "You are better at it than you think," she said. He turned to look at her. "Clara," he said. "Yes." "I am going to ask you something, and I want the honest answer, not the careful one." "I almost always give the honest answer," she said. "You know that by now." "I know," he said. "I'm asking anyway." A beat. "Do you trust me?" The question was simple and enormous, and she felt the full weight of it, the same weight she had felt when she first walked into Whitmore Hall in her worn gloves, the same weight she'd carried through every conversation with Dorothea, and every field walk with Rufus Cade, and every careful morning of keeping the professional distance she had promised herself. She thought about the front door, the back entrance he had offered and then corrected, the seat account he had discharged without announcing it, the way he had stood at the gate and sent Edwin Harlow away, the way he had watched her across every room and never interfered until tonight when she had not asked him to interfere. But he had judged correctly. She acknowledged that this time was different. She thought about, "I don't have a sufficient word for what you are." "Yes," she said. "I trust you." He exhaled. Just slightly. Just once. They reached her farm, and he dismounted at the gate, and he held her horse while she dismounted, and they stood on the road in the cold October dark, and he was very close, and the stars were doing what stars do, and she was a practical woman who did not romanticize her circumstances. But she was also a woman who had been lonely for a very long time, in a particular and specific way. The loneliness of a person who does not show the inside of themselves to anyone, because there has been no one worth the cost. "I will call on you," he said, formally, "if that is if you will permit it." She looked at him. "Formally," she said. "Yes." "You have been coming to my farm for 3 months," she said. "Professionally," he said. "You ate my cornbread standing at my kitchen table," she said. "That was also professional," he said. "Nathaniel." "Clara." "Yes," she said. "You may call on me formally." He looked at her for a moment, and in the starlight she could see that the glass was down completely, all of it, and what was underneath was something that had been waiting for a very long time to be allowed to exist. "Good night," he said. "Good night," she said. She went inside. She closed the door. She stood with her back against it in the dark kitchen, in the cold October quiet of a house that was not paid for, but was hers, and she felt something she had not let herself feel in longer than she could accurately account for. Something that was not careful. Something that was not managed. Something warm. She did not examine it. She simply let it be there in the dark and the quiet for the length of one long breath. And then she lit the candle. And then she sat down at the table. And then she thought for the first time in 8 months, genuinely without the shadow of everything that needed managing about tomorrow. Not about what tomorrow required. About what tomorrow might hold. That was new. That was, she thought, the most significant thing that had happened all evening. More significant than the gathering. More significant than Edwin Harlow's threats, or Eliza's calculated cruelty, or Nathaniel's words to a silent room. The most significant thing was this. For the first time since her father died, she was sitting in the dark and thinking about the future, and it did not feel like something to survive. It felt like something to move toward. Edwin Harlow left the county the following week. He did not announce his departure. He simply was not there one morning when people expected him to be, and his horse was not at the inn, and his name stopped appearing in conversations about Whitmore business with the abruptness of a candle being blown out. Clara heard it from Mrs. Pruitt, who had been keeping closer track of developments than Clara had requested, but was nonetheless useful for it. "Gone back to Virginia," Mrs. Pruitt said. "His sister went with him." "Good," Clara said. "Dorothea Hawthorne has been very quiet," Mrs. Pruitt added with the particular relish of a woman who has watched the powerful go quiet and finds it gratifying. "Since the Caldwell gathering. Very quiet." "She'll find her footing again," Clara said. "Probably," Mrs. Pruitt agreed. "But not with you. I don't think she'll try again with you." Clara thought about that. She thought about the expression on Dorothea's face when Nathaniel had turned to Clara in the middle of the Caldwell gathering and asked if she was ready to go. Not with fire, not with drama, simply with the complete uncomplicated attention of a man who knows where he intends to stand. "No," Clara said. "I don't think she will." Nathaniel called on her formally the following Saturday. He came to the front door of her farmhouse with his hat in his hands, not on his head. In his hands held at his side, with the slight uncertainty of a man who is very capable in most contexts and is aware that this particular context has its own rules, and Clara opened the door and looked at him, and he looked at her, and the entire weight of the last 3 months sat between them like a third person. "Good morning," he said. "Good morning," she said. "Come in." He came in. He sat at her kitchen table. She made coffee. They talked for 2 hours about nothing professional, about his father and her father, about the estate and the farm, about what he had wanted when he was 20, and what he had stopped wanting, and what had surprised him by mattering anyway, about what she had planned and what had happened instead, and what she had learned in the distance between those two things. She told him things she had not told anyone. He told her things he had not told anyone. And somewhere in the middle of the second cup of coffee, Clara looked at him across her kitchen table, the most powerful man in 3 counties, sitting in her small kitchen with his hat on the table and his sleeves rolled up because the morning was warm, talking to her about his father's grain storage system, like she was someone worth talking to, about the things that actually mattered. And she thought, this is it. Not the gathering. Not the formal calling. Not the land arrangement or the south field or any of the professional architecture they had built over 3 months. This. 2 people, a kitchen table, bad coffee, the truth. This was the thing. She picked up her cup. Nathaniel, she said. Yes. I'm glad I came to the harvest dinner, she said. He looked at her. And then fully, completely, for the first time since she had met him, Nathaniel Whitmore smiled. Not the corner of his mouth. Not the almost smile. Not the movement that might have been. A real smile. The kind that starts in the eyes before it gets to the mouth. The kind that changes the whole face. Clara felt it land somewhere behind her sternum, with the same precision as her name in his voice. She did not examine it. She simply let it be there. Which was, she was learning the right thing to do with the things that mattered. He called on her every Saturday after that. Not just Saturday. Tuesday evenings when the farm work was done and the light was going. Thursday mornings on his way to the south field, stopping at her gate with coffee that Harris had put in a flask because Nathaniel had apparently mentioned once that her coffee was better than his, and Harris had decided this was a problem he could partially solve. She did not tell Nathaniel she knew about the flask. She simply drank the coffee and noted that it was in fact better than hers and said nothing. Some things you keep because they are yours. November came in hard and cold, the way Kentucky Novembers do, and the farm work shifted into the rhythms of late-season checking stores, assessing what had been put up, planning for what the winter would require. Clara was good at this. She had done it alone for 2 seasons now, and she had the particular competence of someone who has had to learn a thing completely because there was no one to learn half of it from. Nathaniel sat at her kitchen table on the first Thursday of November and watched her work through the winter account with the same focused attention he brought to everything, and after a long time he said, "You are short on firewood." "I know," she said. "Clara." "I have a solution," she said. "Mrs. Pruitt's son is cutting timber next week. I've arranged to trade labor for a cord." He was quiet. "What kind of labor?" he said. "I'm going to help put up her preserves," Clara said. "It's a fair trade." "I can—" "Nathaniel." She looked up from the account. "I have a solution. I am telling you about it because we talk about things now, not because I need you to replace it with yours." He held her gaze for a moment. Then he said, "All right." She went back to the account. He stayed at the table. After a moment, he said quietly, "I am still learning how to do this." She did not look up, but something in her softened. "I know. You're doing better than you think." "How can you tell?" "Because you said all right," she said. 3 months ago, you would have sent a wagon of firewood the next morning without telling me." A pause. "I still want to send the wagon," he said. "I know you do," she said. "That's why it matters that you didn't." He proposed on a Wednesday. Not Saturday, not during one of the formal calls, not in any of the settings that would have made sense, given the careful social architecture they had been building. He proposed on a Wednesday afternoon in the south field with mud on his boots and the November wind doing what it wanted with his coat while they were standing over the yield measurements that Rufus Cade had brought out and that were unmistakably significantly better than the previous year. Rufus had shown her the numbers first. She had noticed. She did not say anything about it, but she had noticed, and it had meant something. Nathaniel was looking at the tally sheet when he said without looking up, "I want to marry you." Clara went very still. Rufus Cade, who was standing 6 feet away, suddenly became extremely interested in a fence post. "That is not a question," Clara said. No. Nathaniel agreed. He looked up then. I want to marry you. I should have framed it as a question. Will you marry me? She looked at him. He looked back. The wind moved between them. The field was quiet. The numbers on Rufus Cade's tally sheet were very good. Here, she said. You're asking me here, in the south field. I tried to think of a more suitable location, he said. And then I realized that every location I considered was a place other people would find appropriate. And I don't particularly care what other people find appropriate. He held her gaze. This is where we figured out that something I had been doing wrong for 15 years could be done right. It seemed accurate. Clara stared at him. Then she said, Rufus, could you give us a moment? Already gone, miss, Rufus said, and he was retreating toward the barn with the dignified haste of a man who has been in the wrong place for a significant conversation and is handling his exit with admirable efficiency. Clara turned back to Nathaniel. You understand what this means, she said. What people will say. Yes, he said. They will say you lost your mind. They will say I manipulated you. Dorothea will. Clara, he said. I know what they will say. I have spent 10 years managing what they say, and I am tired, and I am done, and I am asking you to marry me in a muddy field in November, because I love you, and I do not want to spend one more carefully managed season pretending that I don't. The wind stopped. Or maybe it didn't stop. Maybe it kept right on doing what November wind does, but in the memory she would carry of this moment for the rest of her life, the wind stopped. You love me, she said. I have loved you, he said with the precision of a man being accurate about a timeline. Since the night you rode home on my horse and said loud enough for me to hear that I was lonelier than you. No one had seen that in 10 years. You saw it in 4 hours. He paused. That is not a small thing. Clara looked at him. She thought about the harvest dinner, and the blue dress, and the cracked mirror, and Mrs. Pruitt telling her she had been baited. She thought about walking into Whitmore Hall and finding her name card at the head table, and deciding in that moment that she would not burn. She thought about 3 months of front doors and kitchen tables and muddy fields and bad coffee and good coffee, and the slow, painstaking work of 2 lonely people learning together how to let something be real. Yes, she said. He blinked. Yes, he said. I will marry you, she said. In the muddy field in November. Yes. He crossed the 6 feet between them in 2 steps, and he took her hands and she felt the warmth of them through her gloves, and she looked up at his face, and the glass was completely gone. All of it. And what was underneath it was something she recognized because she had been carrying the same thing on her side of the glass for longer than she intended to admit. I love you too, she said. Since the cornbread, I think. Possibly earlier. The cornbread, he repeated. You ate it standing at my table, she said. Waiting to be asked to sit. The most powerful man in 3 counties, waiting to be asked to sit down in my kitchen. She looked up at him. That was when I knew you were someone worth the risk. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled her hands closer, and he bent his head, and he kissed her in the south field in November with mud on his boots, and no one watching, except the fields that were already telling them in their quiet and measurable way that things done right look exactly like this. They told no one that day. They walked back to the farmhouse side by side, and drank coffee, and discussed with the combined practicality of 2 people who have built things from nothing what the arrangement would look like. Not romantically, practically. Where she would live. What happened to her farm. What the legal structure of their partnership meant in the context of marriage. How her debt would be handled, which was the conversation she had been refusing for months, and now in this new context had different edges. I want to pay it myself, she said. The debt on this farm, before we marry. Clara. With my wages, she said. From the consulting. Whatever is left in my accounts from the last 3 months. I need to walk into this marriage having settled my father's name myself. Not because you paid it. Me. Nathaniel was quiet. How much is left, he said. She told him. He looked at her. That's almost enough. I know. The remainder. I will earn it, she said. Give me until spring. He looked at her for a very long time. Spring, he said. Spring, she said. All right, he said. And that was that. The news reached Dorothea Hawthorne on a Friday morning in early December, delivered by the particular social telegraph of a county that had been watching and waiting and building its narrative for 4 months. Clara heard from Mrs. Pruitt that Dorothea's response had been a long and deliberate silence, followed by a single comment. I suppose he has made his choice. It was, Clara thought, the most honest thing Dorothea had ever said about anything. She did not gloat. She did not feel the triumphant satisfaction she might have expected. What she felt was simpler and quieter than that. The feeling of a woman who had been told she did not belong in a room and had stayed in the room anyway and had turned out to be the most important person in it. Not because she fought for it, but because she simply refused consistently and entirely to believe the people who told her she wasn't. What she felt was right, just right. The plain, unadorned rightness of a thing that has ended up where it was supposed to. The twist came in January, and it came from a direction Clara had not once considered, which was, she would later reflect exactly the nature of the things that cost you most. They come from the angle you aren't watching. It was a letter. It arrived at the farm on a Tuesday morning, brought by the same postwriter who had brought Nathaniel's harvest dinner invitation 4 months earlier, and the boy looked at her with the same confused expression as if he was not sure he had the right address. She was sure. She knew the handwriting on the envelope before she broke the seal. It was her father's lawyer, a man named Gerard, who had been old when she was young and was now ancient and apparently still practicing in the stubborn way of old men who have decided that death will have to interrupt them rather than wait to be invited. She opened the letter. She read it twice. Then she sat down on the porch steps in January in the cold without her coat and read it a third time. Her father Gerard's letter informed her had not died entirely without assets. There had been a land claim. A small 140 acres in the northern part of the county land that Thomas Bennett had acquired through a debt repayment from another family before his own financial troubles began. Land that had been tied up in a legal dispute for 7 years and had now, with the death of the disputing party, resolved cleanly in the Bennett name. 40 acres, unencumbered, in her name as her father's sole heir. She sat on the porch steps in January, and she felt the particular complexity of a feeling that is too large and too mixed to be called by a simple name. It was not happiness exactly. It was not grief exactly. It was the feeling of the ground shifting of something you thought you understood, turning out to have had a different shape all along. Her father had not left her nothing. He had left her something he did not know he was leaving, tied up in someone else's legal dispute waiting to be hers when the time was right. She thought about Thomas Bennett. Stubborn man, never retreated. Taught his daughter to read a field and run accounts and stand in rooms where she wasn't wanted and refused to be reduced. And left her in the end 40 acres of good northern land. She sat on those porch steps for a long time. Then she went inside and wrote a letter to Gerard, accepting the land in her father's name. And then she wrote a letter to Nathaniel, because they told each other things now, and this was a thing worth telling. He came the next morning. He read the letter at her kitchen table with the same focused attention he brought to yield reports, and he set it down carefully, and he looked at her. 40 acres, he said. 40 acres, she said. Northern quarter, he said. That is good land, Clara. That is very good land. The water table. I know, she said. I've been thinking about it. What are you going to do with it? She looked at him. I thought, she said carefully, about what my father would have done with it, if he had known about it, if things had been different. She paused. He would have farmed it. He would have put everything he had into it and probably made some decisions that were strategically poor and loved every inch of it regardless. Nathaniel was quiet. But you are not your father, he said. No, she said. I'm his daughter, which is different. She held his gaze. I am going to farm it, and I am going to do it right. And when it is producing what it is capable of producing, I am going to use the income to pay off the remaining debt on this farm before spring. He stared at her. The northern quarter will not produce income before spring, he said. The income from my consultation wages will nearly cover it, she said. The land itself, I want it to be the thing that closes the last of it. Even just a portion, a symbolic portion. Clara, he said slowly, that is going to require— I know exactly what it requires, she said. I've been running accounts since I was 16 years old. I know what it requires. She met his eyes. I need you to not offer to solve it. I need you to tell me you will stand beside it. Howe was quiet for a long moment. He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the south field before the proposal, with all the glass gone. I will stand beside anything you decide, he said. You know that. Good, she said. Then let's talk about the water table on the northern quarter. He smiled. That real smile, the one that still moved in her chest every time she saw it, the one she had stopped pretending didn't. The water table on the northern quarter, he said, is going to require better drainage than you currently have resources for. I know, she said. Which is why I was thinking you might want to co-invest in the infrastructure, given that 40 acres of well-drained northern land adjacent to your own properties improves your water management situation considerably. He stared at her. You have already calculated this, he said. I calculated it last night, she said. I couldn't sleep. You couldn't sleep because you were running agricultural economics in your head. I am a practical woman, she said. He laughed. She had heard him laugh before a handful of times in the months they had worked together. But it still did something unexpected, that laugh. It was not the performed laugh of a man in a social setting. It was the real thing surprised out of him, a laugh that had not expected to exist. Yes, he said when it had settled. I will co-invest in the drainage infrastructure. The proposal is sound. I know it is, she said. They married in March. Not in a church, though the Reverend performed the ceremony. In the field. Her field, the original farm, the one her father built with bad carpentry and good intention, the one that was paid off, finally completely in her name and no one else's 2 weeks before the wedding. She had walked to Gerard's office herself and laid the final payment on his desk, and he had looked at her over his ancient spectacles and said, Your father would have been proud. And she had said, I know he would. And she had walked home in the March cold and cried for exactly the length of the road home, and then stopped when she reached her gate and gone inside. She wore the blue cotton dress. Of course she wore the blue cotton dress. It had been washed so many times it had faded to the color of a pale winter sky, and it was mended in 3 places, and it fit her exactly as it always had, and she pinned her hair herself in front of the cracked mirror with the candle burning low, and she looked at herself for a long time. She looked like what she was, a farmer's daughter. A woman who had buried her father with borrowed money and walked into a room full of silk and stayed. A woman who had argued with powerful men about crop rotation and won. A woman who had stood in the middle of a market and refused to perform her own smallness for the benefit of someone else's comfort. She looked like exactly what she was. She thought it was enough. Nathaniel thought it was everything. She could tell when she came down from the house and he saw her. He was waiting at the gate, hat in his hands, as he always seemed to be when something mattered by the way he stopped moving. Not dramatically. Just stopped the way you stop when you see a thing that requires your complete attention. You wore the blue dress, he said. I wore the blue dress, she said. Good, he said. She took his arm. They walked into the field together. The county came. Not all of it. Not Dorothea Hawthorne, who had decided on a prior engagement that everyone understood for what it was. Not Edwin Harlow, who was still in Virginia and would remain there, having discovered that the Whitmore legal representation was in fact considerably better than his. But Henderson came with his practical handshake and his assessment of the northern quarter that he had given her with the same professional respect he would have given any man with 40 good acres. Mrs. Pruitt came with the expression of a woman whose faith in something has been vindicated and who intends to enjoy every moment of that vindication. Rufus Cade came, which surprised her more than almost anything, and he stood at the back of the gathering with his arms crossed and his expression arranged in what she had come to understand was his version of warmth, and when the ceremony ended, he came forward and shook her hand and said, "Yields up 22% on the south field." And she understood that this was his wedding gift, and it was the one she valued most from him. Harris was there. The stable boy who had brought her the horse that first night, now 17 and standing straight. The farm workers from all three properties. Men who had watched their conditions slowly improve over the months of Clara's consultation. Men who had begun to understand that the new management philosophy fair, wages reasonable hours, repairs to the worker housing that had been in poor condition since Nathaniel's father's time, was not temporary. They came, and something happened at that gathering that Clara did not expect. 3 months earlier, at the Caldwell gathering, she had walked into a room and felt the weight of its judgment pressing down on her like weather. She had felt the social architecture arrange itself against her, and she had stood inside it and refused to let it move her at significant personal cost. This gathering pressed differently. The weight was still there. Social weight is always there. It is simply the gravity of people caring what other people think, but it pressed differently. It pressed in the direction she was standing rather than against it. It pressed for the first time in the 2 years since her father died, in a way that felt like being held rather than tested. She was not certain she had the word for what that felt like. She thought she might need the same new framework she had described to Nathaniel months ago, when she told him that you cannot argue people into a new way of seeing. You can only show them one. She had shown them one. He had shown them one. Together in the muddy fields, and the small kitchen, and the social battlegrounds of 3 Kentucky counties. They had simply been what they were consistently and entirely, until the space around them had no choice but to reshape itself to accommodate the reality they had built. The first summer of their marriage, the northern quarter produced what Clara had said it would produce. She knew it would. She had calculated it. She had planned it. She had argued with the drainage contractor about angles and depth with the same focused precision she brought to everything, and she had been right, and the numbers proved it. And Rufus Cade brought her the tally sheet with the same expression he had worn that November afternoon in the South Field. Not quite admiration, not coming that far, but something very close to it that he had never fully expected to feel about anyone in her position. Good numbers, he said. Good field, she said. You were right about the fallow on the south. I know, she said. He almost smiled. Don't get comfortable, he said. I'm never comfortable, she said. I'm efficient. He walked away, and she could have sworn from the set of his shoulders that he was actually smiling. Nathaniel found her in the field that evening, in the long summer light, checking the drainage lines one more time, because she was a woman who checked things twice, and he came and stood beside her and looked at the numbers she was holding. Good summer, he said. Very good, she said. The workers' housing on the east property, he said. Henderson's nephew is a carpenter. He gave me a quote last week. I saw the quote, she said. It's fair. I was going to approve it, he said. But I wanted to ask you first. She looked up at him. 3 months ago, no longer a year ago, Nathaniel Whitmore would not have asked. He would have made the decision and executed it with full confidence in his own authority. Not out of cruelty, but out of the habit of a man who had never been in a position where asking mattered. Yes, she said. Approve it. He nodded. And the Caldwell property, she said. The irrigation on the lower acre. I want to walk it with you next week. Name the day, he said. She named it. They stood together in the field in the summer evening, and the numbers were good, and the housing was going to be repaired, and the drainage was right, and the south field was in its fallow year, and all 3 farms were performing in ways they had not performed in 15 years, and none of it had happened because of money or power or any of the things that people in that county had spent 3 generations believing were the only things that mattered. It had happened because of this 2 people, both carrying too much alone, who had found each other in a room designed to humiliate one of them, and had decided in their separate but parallel ways to simply be honest. That was all. That was everything. The story. The county told about them in the years that followed shifted in the way stories shift when they outlive their original narrators. By the second year, people had largely forgotten the cruelty of the harvest dinner seating, or reframed it as a charming coincidence. Can you believe they met like that? Dorothea Hawthorne, who outlived her own narrative by decades, would in her later years describe herself as one of the first people to see the match clearly, which was the particular revisionism of a woman who understood that history belongs to the people willing to claim it. But the workers on this East property told it differently. They told it to their children and their children's wives. The real version, the ground-level version, the version where a woman in a mended blue dress had walked into the most powerful room in the county and refused to be a lesson. The version where the coldest man in Kentucky had stood in a crowded room and said out loud in front of witnesses that the woman they called beneath them was the only person there who had spoken to him like a human being. The version where the drainage got fixed and the wages went up and the housing got repaired, not because someone had a change of heart, but because someone who understood what fair looked like had insisted on it long enough and consistently enough that it became the only option. That was the version that lasted. That was the version Clara would have recognized. She was in the study at Whitmore Hall one evening, in the second autumn of their marriage, going over the following year's planting plans, when Nathaniel came in and set a cup of coffee on her desk and sat down in the chair across from her. She did not look up. "You're watching me work," she said. "Yes," he said. "Is there a reason?" "I like watching you work," he said. "You do it like you're solving something that has never been solved before." She looked up. I was watching her with the expression that had replaced the glass. The open one. The one that still surprised her a little because it had come from behind such careful walls and it was so entirely undefended. "Everything is being solved for the first time," she said. "That's why it requires attention." "Is that something your father said?" "It's something I say," she said, though he would have agreed with it. Nathaniel picked up his own coffee. "Henderson wants to propose a grain cooperative," he said. "He mentioned it to me at the mill on Thursday. Several of the county farmers working a shared contract rather than competing individually." Clara considered this. "Who would manage the accounts?" she said. "He suggested you," Nathaniel said. She looked up. "Henderson suggested me," she said. "Henderson said, and I believe I am quoting accurately, 'Your wife is the only person in this county I trust to run numbers without stealing from half of us.'" He picked up his coffee. "Which I believe coming from Henderson is approximately equivalent to a formal commendation." Clara sat back in her chair. She thought about the market and Dorothea and the harvest dinner, and the long road she had walked home that August night with a borrowed horse and a chest full of things she did not yet have names for. She thought about front doors and back entrances and the particular daily labor of being a person who refuses to be reduced. She thought about her father and 40 acres and a lawyer's letter in January, and the way the ground shifts under you when you have been walking on it long enough to finally feel its real shape. "Tell Henderson yes," she said. "I already told him you'd want to think about it," Nathaniel said. "Then tell him I thought about it," she said. "The answer is yes." He nodded. He made a note on the paper beside him. She went back to the planting plans. The fire was warm. The house was quiet in the way of houses that are full of work and therefore full of life. Outside, the Kentucky autumn was doing what Kentucky autumns do, laying color over everything, spending itself with a generosity that knows it is temporary and does not let that stop it. "Nathaniel," she said without looking up. "Yes." "I'm glad you sent the horse." A pause. "I almost didn't," he said. "I had the stable hand saddled and ready, and then I stood at the window for 10 minutes, arguing with myself about whether it was appropriate." "What decided it?" she said. He was quiet for a moment. "You had walked 2 miles in the August heat in a dress that was clean because you had cared enough to make it clean," he said. "And you were going to walk 2 more miles home in the dark, and I could not watch that happen if I had a horse." He paused. "It was a practical decision." She looked up. "It was not a practical decision," she said. "No," he said. "It wasn't." She held his gaze. "It was the beginning," she said. "Yes," he said. "It was." She went back to her planting plans. He went back to his notes. The fire burned. The house settled around them with the quiet certainty of a place that had been waiting to feel like a home, and had finally, after 30 years of something missing, found its way to what that meant. There are stories that the county tells about power, about land, about which families matter and which names carry weight. Those stories have narrators who build them carefully and protect them and revise them when revision serves their purposes. And then there are the other stories. The ones that don't need protecting. The ones that live in the ground-level places in workers' housing, that got repaired in Southfield Yields, that came back in a grain cooperative run by a farmer's daughter who walked into the most powerful room in the county in a mended blue dress and refused with absolute and unshakable consistency to be anything other than exactly what she was. Those are the stories that last, because the truth doesn't need anyone to manage it. It simply needs someone willing to stand in it all the way, without flinching in the muddy field, and the crowded room, and the long dark road home, until the space around it has no choice but to become what it always should have been. And Clara Bennett Whitmore had never